We're holding on 12 on this subject. Dealing with names and zaysim, olives, and grapes. We of course biblical in nature and the whole tithing and the whole business. Now we're dealing in tithing, obviously, it's the same rules. Here we go. Now awesome. 12b2. Still time. Okay, required.
Hey, Jerry, did we lose Yitzhak?
Okay, sorry about that. I'm having issues with my internet. So, everybody, okay, Jeff, you showed up right on time.
Very good. Good morning.
I was looking if it was our thing over here. No, it's your end on your internet.
No, I think it's my internet. I think it's mine.
Yes.
Right. So here we go. Once again, we're on the bottom of 12b2. We're talking about the tithing needs of vegetables, which is only rabbinic in nature. Biblically speaking, only grains, the 5 different grains, plus olives, plus grapes are biblically required to have tithing, but vegetables are only rabbinic in nature. But again, be that as it may, all of them are tied to Gemar Malacha, to the final production. When is it considered final production that therefore raises its level, that it is now susceptible, that it requires tithing? So the Gemara goes, Tanan Hos, the bottom of 12b2. Hatilton Misha Titzmach, fenugreek, a type of spice, requires meiser, tithing, when it sprouts. When it sprouts, it's there, it's already considered it. That's its production. It's now usable. It needs to have meiser. Hatavua, that means grains. Now we're going back into the biblical requirement to tithe. Produce v'azesim, produce and olives. Mishiavayu shalish, when they grow 1/3 of their maturity, they already require to be tithed. Now we're on the next page, 12b3. 12b3. My mishtamnich. What does the Mishnah mean when it sprouts? Mishtitzmach lizeroim. It means when its seeds sprout. Rashi says when it forms seeds. Others say when in fact its seeds are so strong that they themselves could be planted. Bottom line is that's its Gemar Malachi, its end of its production. So break the Gemara Tavua v'Azeitim Shivayu Shlish. The grains of the olives biblically required to be tithed. I don't know the third already. Some say it comes from the community. Bottom of the page, on the page, 12b3.
Yitzhak, you sound like you're underwater.
I like I'm on the water. Does it sound a little better? No good. Any good? Log out and I'm gonna go back in. Okay? I'm logging out and coming back in. Let me see if I can get this to go.
Okay.
Hold on. I'm gonna log out. Let me get out. Okay? Give me a second.
Or Jeff, sometimes we've been told if it doesn't work, Sometimes you just got to do audio without the video.
Ah, okay. I'll try that next time.
Is this better?
Yeah, a lot better.
There we go. Okay. Something's going on with my internet. I'm sorry. So if it happens again, just flag me down. So here we go. So we're on 12b3. Okay. Hatavua v'azeisim shevayu shlish. Grapes and olives, which are biblically required tithing, they need it from the time they grow a third of their maturity. Minahani mili. How do I know this? So Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rav Yochanan, Umatuba Mishmedi Rav Yossi Agalili. Rav Yochanan, some say in the name of Rav Yossi Agalili. Amar Kral, the pasuk says, Mikates at the end. Mikates Sheva Shonim B'Moyed Shnas HaShmita B'Chag HaSukkot. At the end of the 7 years during the appointed time of the year of Shemitah on the Yontif of Shavu of Sukkot. So what does the Yontif of Sukkot have to do with Shemitah? So Shnas HaShmita Ma'yididei B'Chag HaSukkot. What is the year of Shemitah having anything to do with the Yontif of Sukkot? Shemini, that's already the 8th year of the cycle. Shemitah ends on Rosh Hashanah, right? Sukkot is 16 days later. It's already the 8th year. Elolai Malach, to teach me, call to Sheviu Shlish Bishvias. Any grains that grow 1/3 of maturity during the 7th year, like this year, before Rosh Hashanah, you have to treat it as sabbatical produce even during the 8th year, all the way through Sukkot. If it's grown already 1/3 of its maturity in the previous year, the year ending Rosh Hashanah, then you've got to schlep. You got to extend Shavias onto those products all the way through as they mature in the 8th year. Jerry, can you step in right over here and repeat what you started this year with? If
So
you're there,
we have olive groves in Chalutza, and the olives are not ready for picking until literally the end of this month. They're going to start picking next week and the week afterwards.
yes.
So my questions were, how do we deal with the Shemitah situation? And because roughly, I mean, here it says 1/3. My guys say because 2/3 of the growth happened before Rosh Hashanah. Therefore, there's no problem to use it as if it was you were picking it before Rosh Hashanah. So basically, we have
Right.
to.
In other words,
Right.
but next year, you
Right.
run into a problem. Because
Yes,
our Gemara is talking about your next year problem. That
Right.
if it grows 1/3, it grows 1/3 in the old year and finishes maturing in the Sukkot period, Sukkot Machashvan period, now you run into a problem that you can't use it. Very good. So we now continue. 12b3, the last words. Amalei Rav Zera Rav Asi, says Rav Zera to Rav Asi. And now we're on today's daf, 13a1. 13a1, Bedilma, the daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, Bedilma Lo Yayu Klau. Perhaps the pasuk is really coming to tell us that we're dealing with fruits that did not ripen at all before Rosh Hashanah. That and the Rahman is telling us that it should be treated, the new year should be treated as Shemitah until the Yontif of Sukkot. In other words, that's what you have to do. You've got to extend Shemitah all the way to Sukkot. That's it. Says the Gemara Lo Sakadato. Don't even think like that. Dikseh, because the pasuk says the festival of gathering, the Yontif of gathering. Ha'asif means gathering. B'tseis Hashanah at the end of the year. My Asif. What does it mean by gathering? If it simply means to inform us that Sukkot has arrived, by describing it as the Yom Tov that comes at the time of the gathering in of the harvest. Diksim ba'aspecha. There's another in the same pasuk. It says ba'aspecha. You will gather in your work from the field. Ba'aspecha b'sadecha. Elamai osif. What is the extra word of osif of gathering? It means katsir, the actual harvesting and cutting of the grains. That teach us that the produce which is ripe and ready to be harvested by Sukkot has the din of the previous year, i.e. the Shemitah year. We say it grew enough in the 7th year that even though you're now harvesting it in the 8th year, it has the din of the 7th year. And the rabbis, the Chachamim came along and therefore set a blanket rule that any produce that's fully matured and is ready to be harvested, and by the time we hit Sukkot, like Jerry's olives, the Yadua, it's taken for granted, Sheviu Shlish Lifnei Rosh Hashanah, that by definition it must have grown at least a third of its maturity before Rosh Hashanah. The Kakari Lev, it says Hashanah, and therefore it's referred to at the close of the year, teaching us that anything that reaches a third of maturity before Rosh Hashanah has a din of the previous year, i.e. the Shemitah year, or this year, which is the Shemitah year, it has the din of the 6th year. It has the din of the 6th year, and therefore it's not a problem. So like Jerry said, his things this year are not problematic. Next year he's going to have a problem. Not a problem, he's got the opportunity to do a mitzvah. Amalei Rabbi Yemi Rab Zeira, says Rabbi Yemi to Rab Zeira, V'kimlei Rabbanim Beit Shlish L'Pachzim Shlish. But really, give me a break. The Rabbanim really know the difference. They can tell the difference between a plant that's grown a third and a plant that it's reached less than a third. Amalei, so Rab Zeira said to Rabbi Yemi, he jumped all over him. Have I told you not to take yourself outside the framework of halacha? Of course, Chazal are so medactic. They have a very clear understanding of stuff. All the measurements of midah, by the way, when we say somebody has good midas, we're really saying he's has good measurement. He's a measured person. Because midas really means measurement. All measurements of Chazal are like this. They're given in exact terms. For an example, a mikvah, right? We all table in a mikvah. Ba'aboyim sahu table. Okay, ba'aboyim sahu table. One can immerse in a mikvah of exactly 40 sa of water. But ba'aboyim sahu chosek kartov, but a 40 sa mikvah that's missing just a kartov, which is just a drop, but nonetheless brings it below 40 sa, no, it's not a mikvah anymore. The amount of food that has the size of an egg has the ability to transmit tumah to other things. But a beya the size of something the size of an egg, minus the size of a sesame seed, that means just a drop. Does not have the power to transmit tumah. Shloisha metama midras, a cloth that measures 3 handbreadths by 3 handbreadths has the power to contract midras tumah, meaning that somebody who had a seminal emission and sits on a piece of cloth, if the cloth is 3 handbreadths by 3 handbreadths, the cloth also becomes tameh with midras. Shloisha al shloisha, but if you have a cloth that's 3 tvachim by 3 tvachim, chasa neima achas, minus 1 thread, Eina metama midras, does not contract midras. Hada Rabbi Yemi, so Rabbi Yemi went back and said, "Loud milsidami." discount what I said before. Of course, Chazal are medactic and know exactly shiurim. And he brings proof. The boyimine chavrei mid Rav Kahana. The chavreim required of Rav Kahana. Oimer she'krivi Yisrael k'nisas la'aretz. If everybody remembers, on the second day of Pesach, the 16th day of Nisan, we was brought the carbon oimer, the carbon for the new grains. And in bringing up this carbon, this new the new grain carbon, what it did was it freed everybody to start using the new grains that are now sprouted and were harvested in the new year. That means you no longer had to use Yashan, the old, you were allowed to use Chadash, the new. But it required grains, right? It required that you had to bring barley grains to the Beis Hamikdash and offer them up, which then said, okay, now we can begin to use Chadash. So the question became, when the Eden first came into Eretz Yisrael in the times of Yeshua, in the times of Joshua, regarding the oimer that the Eden offered when they came into the land of Israel in the days of Yeshua, where did they get the barley? In time in the Al Miyad Nachri, they grew in the hands of the Nachrim, they bought it off the Goyim. Can't be. The pasuk says regarding the oimer, kitzirchem, your harvest. The oimer has to be brought from your harvest. Amar Rachmana, v'loi kitzir nachri, but not the harvest of a goy. So if it says the Gemara, mimai di kribu. Let me ask you in the first place. Dilmaloy kribu. Maybe you're right. They couldn't have any barley because they didn't have time to grow the barley. And therefore, they never brought the omer at all in the first year. They only ate yashan. They only ate from the old grains. They didn't eat any of the new grains in the first year that they came into Eretz Yisrael. Who said they did? We're now on 13A2. 13A2. Says the Gemara, Loi Sal Kedata. Don't say that. Dikseh, because it says, V'yochul my avur ha'aretz mimochas ha'pesach. And they ate from the produce of the land on the day after Pesach, i.e., on the day of the Omer, the 16th day of Nisan. Mimachas HaPesach ha'ikul. That implies that on the day after the first day of Pesach, i.e., on the 16th of Nisan, they ate the produce of the land, the Chodosh from the land. But before that, they did not eat the produce. Because they first offered the omer on the second day of Pesach, on the 16th of Nisan, which then allowed them to be permitted to eat from the Chodosh, from the new growths. So what do you say? So back to Akasha. Where did they get the barley to offer up the carbon omer that freed them to use the new grains? Amalahen. So he told them, Kol shaloi hevi shalish biyad nachri. They used whatever had not grown a third of maturity. They bought it off the goyim, and then they continued to take care of them until they grew a third or more, and then they were able to use that for the omer. And says the Gemara, "V'dilma oil v'loy kimle." But perhaps the barley had already grown a third of a maturity, but they weren't able to determine it. So how could Chazal go ahead and buy the barley off the goyim on the assumption that it had not yet grown a third and it would grow a third under their watch, under their ownership? Ela kimlahu. Rather, we have to say that the sages of that generation were perfectly capable of knowing when something grew a third and when something did not grow a third. We say that our sages know the exact what is a third ripe versus less than a third ripe. And as Jerry told us, his workers who are experts have told him that his olives have already matured at least 2/3 of the way before Rosh Hashanah even showed up. And this is where it's coming from. The Dilma loy ayil klal. But perhaps they offered the oima from barley that had not ripened at all when they entered the land. Said, in other words, the oil river, but if, let's say, it ripened, for an example, a fourth of its maturity, a quarter of the way, maybe they have no way of determining it, so they only bought off the goyim completely stunted barleys. Says the Gemara, absolutely don't think that way. And it says the nation came up from Jordan on the 10th of the month, the 10th of Nisan. The Isaac adopted loyal klal, and if you're going to say that they then took unripened barley, that's what they bought off the goyim on the 10th of Nisan. B'chamisha yomet kamalya, it becomes fully ripe in only 5 days by the 16th of Nisan to be available to offer it for the Omer. Elamai, the Gemara says, and that's impossible. Elamai, they must have bought from when it was 1/3, and it's proof that they know how to read the shiurim. Elamai, the Gemara says, no proof. The ayil ripsa oidina damka, that it had ripened a quarter or a sixth when the Yidden entered, when the Jews entered Eretz Yisrael on the 10th. Akati b'chamish yomim ikamalya, still in 5 days remaining till the offer or Omer, will it become fully ripe when it's only at a quarter or a sixth of its growth? Elamayis l'lamema. Eretz Sivi, Eretz Yisrael is called Eretz Sivi, the land of the deer, Kesivba, it's called on it, which means that everything ripens quickly. So it's possible for grains that was to have a spurt from the 4th or the 6th into full maturity in 5 days. If that's the case, Hachanami Eretz Sivi, that it's written also in the land of the deer that grains that might lead from total immaturity all the way to full maturity, to total immaturity to full maturity within 5 days. So in other words, I don't have a proof from here, from what happened to the Jews that when they came into Eretz Yisrael, that if Chazal really knew the exact nafkamina, the exact point of demarcation between something that's exactly a third growth versus slightly less than a third growth. So I don't have any proof. So says the Gemara further. Here we go. Maskepla Rav Chanina. Rav Chanina asked the question on the Yisai that everything is tied to 1/3 growth. Umi matzesami dai oisiv katzehu. But how do you know that pasuk, which is where you're trying to learn all this up, that the word gathering means harvesting? V'aksiv, it says, and that's saying in the same area in the Torah, v'aspecha v'gancha u'mikvecha. But it's written regarding Sukkot. The yontif of Sukkot you shall make for yourself 7 days with your gathering from your threshing floor, and from your wine vat. And the master says, you know what the pasuk is coming to tell us? The pasuk is talking about the refuse on the threshing floor and the wine vat, which are not susceptible to tumah because they're not edible, but they grow from the ground. In other words, the Torah is coming to tell us what material is allowed to be used for schach, for the cover for the sukkah, that it has to be something that's gedula min hakarka. It has to be something that grows from the ground, but is not royal lemekabel tumah, but it cannot catch tumah, it cannot get contaminated. So for an example, bamboos grow from the ground, but because bamboos are wood that grow directly from the ground, wood cannot be mekabel tumah. That's why we use bamboos. Simple. Or the leaves from the palm tree. The leaves on the palm tree grow from the ground, from the tree. If they fall off, you could use them because they're not mekabel tumah. So that's what it's coming to teach us. Just like the stuff on the floor are stuff that grow from the floor, but are not mekabel tumah, and they're not susceptible to tumah, and they grow from the ground. So too, everything for sukkahs that's needed for schach has to be things that grow gedulei min haaretz, that grow from the ground, and are not ready to be Mekabel Toma. So you got no proof over here this has anything to do with the growths of the actual grains. So says the Gemara. We're now on 13a3. Okay, so he says, you're right. Amar Rav Zera, Hamilsa Habibiyodan. We had a resolution in our hands. Va'asa Rav Chanina Shadaba Nago. And Rav Chanina came and threw an axe at it. In other words, now I got no proof. How do we know Elaminolan? How do we know that it's all tied to 1/3? That the rule is 1/3 growth of grains and olives is enough of a growth that if that happened in the Shemitah year, it has a din of Shemitah, and if it happened in the 6th year, it has a din of the 6th year. Kedetanya, like we learned in a Brisa. Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef, Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef says, I will ordain my blessing to you in the 6th year. And this is what Jerry told us the other day. And I will make a crop sufficient for 3 years. Because the 6th year has to cover the 7th year when you're not allowed to and plant to do anything. In the 8th year, you first plant. It's only in year 9 that you get this stuff. So you need 3 years worth of coverage. So the Torah Kedosh is saying Hashem is being made. I'm going to make it work. I will ordain my blessing in the 6th year that it will be enough of a bumper crop will cover you for 3 years. We're now on Yud Gimel Amid Beis. Yud Gimel Amid Beis, 13b1. Says the Gemara, Al Tikri L'Shloish. Don't read it as for 3 years, Ella L'Shalish. Read it as though it says Shalish for 1/3 of the crop. Not for 3 years, but for 1/3 of the crop. That if it grows to 1/3, it takes on, whenever it grows into 1/3, that's the year it belongs to. So pray to Gemara about me, but wait a minute, I need it for its literal meaning. For what Jerry taught me, Rabbi Jerry said that in the 6th year, you need a bumper crop to cover you for 3 years. Krina says, but there's another pasuk for that. You shall sow in the 8th year, and you shall eat from the old crop until the 9th year. What's the old crop? It's obviously not the crop of the 7th year, because the 7th year was Shemitah. Elamai, it's the crop of the 6th year. Okay, we go further. Tanan Hosam. Ha'oires, rice. So let's stop right here. There is 2 different shittas. Is rice a grain and is part of the 5 grains when the Torah talks about it? Or in fact, rice is not a grain. Rice is the rare thing. So if you have Rice Krispies, you would make a mezainis, but you don't make an alamichya. You make a borei nefashos. Because we're not sure which way to go with rice. Okay? In fact, the Svardim eat rice on Pesach. How could they eat rice on Pesach? We Ashkenazim don't eat rice. We say it's kidneys. And it's a grain.
That's not correct. Jeffrey Karp eats rice because his wife is a Spartan. Jeffrey?
There you go. Jeffrey, did he drop out on us?
No, he's around somewhere.
He's around somewhere. All right.
I converted.
You converted. There you go. You converted. There you go. But this is important. We're going to bang into this issue about rice throughout Shas. Rice is a very interesting dilemma in halacha. But anyways, let's learn over here we have. Let's see what this mandama holds of rice. Ha'oires, rice. Va'hadoichan, millet. Va'perogim, poppy. Va'shumshin, and sesame. Shehir shriu lefnei Rosh Hashanah, that took root before Rosh Hashanah. Misasim l'sha'ava goes according to the past year when it took root. Umutarim b'shvius, and therefore mutar shvius, like this year, like the case of Jerry. If it took root in the previous year, even though you're harvesting it in shvius, not a problem. The imlav, if they didn't take root until after Rosh Hashanah, isurim b'shvius umisastim l'shana haba, and they are tithed according to the coming year. That's what the rule is. In other words, in short, the critical stage is when they take root.
Right, which is different. It's not even the third that we talked about other items. This one basically, once it takes root, so it could be a day beforehand it took root. That's it.
At least at this point, the point in the Gemara, according to this man the Yoma. Remember, you got to remember, we're taking the Gemara as it is. It could very well be that one of the other man the Amra might argue and say you need 2 weeks, you need a year. But the odds are that these things are very delicate. They're not trees, they're not things. So it could very well be that everybody would agree their rooting can happen in a day. But pashtus from right here, this Gemara is whenever it roots and we don't look. That's exactly right. So Amar Rabba. When did the Rabbanan say that the assignment of a fruit of a tree follows the emerging of the fruits? When the fruits sprout, blossom. Tavua v'zeisim, grains and olives, basa shalish, go after a third of their growth. So, by the way, Jerry, tell your workers it's not 2/3. The rule is 1/3. Okay. And yerek, vegetables, bosa, lakita, when they're picked. Until they're picked, they're not considered gemar malach, the end of their produce. Hani keman sheninu rabbanan. So to what did the rabbanan equate these items? In other words, the rule that the Mishnah gives, that they're assigned based on rooting, does not match any of these categories over here. So says the Gemara, Hadam Rabba. Okay, I'm backing up. Since they are crumbled a few at a time. In other words, Rashi explains they're harvested a few at a time, not all at once. Okay? So, also Rabbanon Basa Sharosha. Rabbanon, in assigning it, goes after their roots. If you take a look at number 16, they explain Rashi from the Gemara in Beya. That is, if they are harvested a few at a time rather than all at once, because the harvesting of beans involves crumbling the pod to extract the bean. The term is used for the harvesting of kidneys. If you remember from Beya, we said they rubbed it with their fingers. Remember? They put it between their fingers. Can you do that on Yom Tov? Because you're breaking it open, but you're not breaking it open the normal way. You're rubbing it between your fingers. Amalei Abaya, but on this break Abaya, let him pile up the entire contents on his threshing floor in the middle and mix it up well. We're on 13b2. So that therefore the new and the old parts of the harvest are distributed to evenly. The nimsa, and therefore we find Tyren min achadish shabai al achadish shabai. In this way, when he separates out the Maisa, he will separate out the Maisa, the new from the new, min hayoshin from the yoshan. Milai Tananya, didn't we learn that this works? Rabbi Yosef ben Kaifa Amar Mishum, Rabbi Shimon Shazuri. Rabbi Yosef ben Kaifa said in the name of Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, Pul HaMitzri Shazar Lazera, the crop of Egyptian beans. The Egyptian beans, okay, that were planted for seeds. Mixasa Hishus Rosh Hashanah, Mixasa Hishus Liachar Hashanah, Rosh Hashanah. Some took root before Rosh Hashanah, some took root after Rosh Hashanah. Ain't Taimenu Maisim Izel Zen, therefore you're not allowed to separate Truma from the old to the new and the new to the old. Because we don't do Trumas and Maitzris, from old to you, from the old stuff on the new stuff and the new stuff on the old stuff. So what's he going to do with these seeds? So what does he do? He piles everything onto the threshing floor in the middle. And he's found to have separated the new portion from the new. And when says the Gemara, Amalei, Rab Shimon Sizuri Kama. You're speaking about Rab Shimon Sizuri. Rab Shimon Sizuri shoving Saba Yesh Bila. Rab Shimon ben Sizuri holds that we hold from blending. That even when you blend such a mixture, that when you blend it together, we assume that they're evenly distributed. But Rabbanon Sabri ain't Bila, there's no such thing as Bila. And therefore, I cannot say that they were smoothed out, what he called evenly, and therefore the old and the old and the new could be mixed up all together, and therefore that doesn't work. In other words, if this looks very similar to our old argument of Yesh Berera or Ein Berera, do I say what I do now defines retroactively what took place, or I do not? You would be correct. The logic behind Yesh Bila or Ein Bila is the same logic behind Yesh Berera or Ein Berera. So now the Gemara goes, Amar Rab Yitzchak ben Achmeni Amar Shmuel Halacha ki Rab Yosi ben Kefa Shama Mishum Rab Shimon Sizuri, that we do say Bila, we do say you compile them all up, and we assume that they were evenly distributed, and the old will be meisid for the old, and the new will be meisid for the new. Rab Zera says, is that a fact? The Shmuel really say this. But Shmuel said, La kol ein bila. We do not assume blending chutz miyayim v'shemen except for wine and oil because they're liquids. We don't assume blending on dry stuff, only on liquids. How could he accept Rav Shimon Sizuri's ruling regarding beans that you do say bila? Says the Gemara, Ishtamite Hodam Shmuel. Rav Zera forgot what else Shmuel said. Hakol Eicha Acher Gemar Peri. Everything goes after the completion of its fruit. Okay? It's based on when it reaches full maturity. And that's that. And the Gemara says like this. We're on tomorrow's daf. On Shabbos' daf, we're only going a little bit. We're just going to go until Tanya. Okay? Yudalit. Yudalit Amid Aleph 14a1. Utsaricha. We need it. The Iyashmin Allah Rav Shimon Sizuri. If we say the Allah is like Rav Shimon Sizuri, that you do say bila, even by dry produce, have a meaning yesh bila. That's because we think he has an assumption of you do say blending. Kamash malon la kol ein bli bila. In fact, to everything except liquids like wine and oil, you do not say bila. And he's telling us where there is no assumption for bila, for blending, except and if anything except liquids. I might have thought that he held like the Rabbanon, that when beans from Mitzrayim, the Egyptian beans, are not assigned when they take root, since they cannot be blended evenly, we have a problem, then they can't be used. Kamash Malon, Allah Rav Shimon Sizuri. He's telling us that yes, over there the Allah is like Rav Shimon Sizuri, and Maisa can be taken from the mixture itself. If you're coming to teach me only these two things, have a mina kasha to Shmuel on Shmuel. Then it comes out a contradiction of Shmuel to Shmuel. Because in one case, Shmuel says the beans cannot be blended evenly because we do not say bila. How can he rule like Shmuel, Shimon Sizuri, that Maisa can be taken from the mixture itself when the mixture has both the old and the new? And if I don't say it was distributed equally and evenly, then it's a big mix, and you might come to take Maisa from the old to the new and the new to the old. Kamash Malon, he's coming to teach us. Hakol hoichel acha gemar peri. Everything goes after the completion of the fruit, and so all beans, including those that took root before Rosh Hashanah, are therefore assigned the new year and can be tied together. Because when's the completion of the fruit? When it's picked. That's what we said before. When it's picked. Kamash Malon, Akol, hang on 1 second. Just hang on 1 second. Who is it? He said the door should be, is the door open? Open the door. Open the door, okay? Okay. Sorry about that. So here we go. So it doesn't take place when it's rooted. We're going away from that. We're saying it goes to when it's picked. But if you wanted to tell us only it goes after when it's completed the fruit, when it completely blossoms, or it gets picked. I might have thought that even applies to produce and olives. When it gets picked, when it's harvested. It's like Rav Shimon Zuzuri, only in the case in which he took issues with regard to kidneys. In other words, that Shmuel assigned kidneys based on when they reach full maturity, but grains and olives are assigned based on when they reach a third of their maturity. La Shmina and Haritati, but let him only inform these two rulings that the halach is like Rav Shimon Zuzuri and that everything follows the completion of the fruit. La kol ein bilo lomali. Why do I need to get to? Why do you need to say there's no assumption of blending except for how did we get to the blending? Then why did that come in here? Kamash Malon. The only reason why we brought up the whole idea of blending is to teach us, you're right, there's no such thing as an assumption of an even blend, except when it comes to liquids. When it comes to liquids, if you have old liquid, old olive, old wine, and new wine, and you put it together, it's considered as one, and you can go ahead and you can separate the old from the old and the new from the same exact mixture. Very good. So this is where we're stopping at Tanya of Yosef Galil. So this is